As the world demands more content, it's becoming harder to know which paths to take to reach your audience. Whether you're a full-time marketer, business owner, or content creator, the amount of constantly changing information can be overwhelming. Hi, I'm Ellie Puckett, the CEO of Resonate Recordings. We are a premier podcast production company serving over 3,000 clients with 16 shows reaching #1 on Apple Podcasts. Here on the Resonate podcast, we will cover the cutting edge of all things content and marketing. We demystify everything about podcasting, social media, SEO, and even generative AI. Join us as we explore the success stories and challenges of people just like you, and walk away with actionable steps to help your content resonate. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Resonate podcast. Today, we are excited to be speaking with Colin Shaw. He is the founder and CEO of Beyond Philosophy and the host of a podcast called The Intuitive Customer. Colin is a LinkedIn top voice with a absolutely massive following of 283,000 people and 84,000 loyal subscribers on his LinkedIn newsletter. His consulting company, Beyond Philosophy, has been selected 4 times by the Financial Times as a top management consultancy. We at Resonate are a proud partner of Colin in the production of his The Intuitive Customer podcast. And Colin is also the author of 8 bestsellers on customer experience. Today, we're excited to dig into the benefits of great customer experience and how it can be the best organic marketing that you can have. So let's jump into it. Colin, thank you for being on the show.
Great to be on, Ellie. Thank you very much.
So tell us, how did you become a customer experience expert?
I was in corporate life. I've had sort of 2 careers, if you like. And my boss turned around to me one day when I was in corporate life and he said, Colin, I would like you to improve the customer experience, but I'd like you to do it at least cost, which is always the challenge they throw in at the end. I went away from there and I thought to myself, what do we mean by customer experience? And bear in mind, this is back in 1999 or something. And I realized what I didn't really understand was what is a customer experience and why is it important? He had the foresight to realize that when everything is a commodity, the thing that people select upon is the experience. So the experience that you give your customers. And obviously with the world becoming so much more commoditized over the years, the experience that you give your customers is absolutely critical. After that, I spent 3 years in putting together a big program at the company and then decided to take a big step and have an interesting conversation with my wife about leaving corporate life and a regular salary to set up on my own and write a book. And I guess the rest is history.
That's amazing. It's not a small leap of faith, especially coming from corporate world to become an entrepreneur. What made you feel like you had what it took? Because, I mean, you've built something amazing at this point.
Have you ever read a book called Who Moved My Cheese?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you got to read it. It's a really good book. It basically talks about change, okay? And what had happened was when I had joined the corporate world, I'd set my sights on progressing up the greasy pole, and I'd got there. And then I realized when I got there, actually, the fun wasn't being there. The fun was getting there. This book, Who Moved My Cheese, had a really good question in the book, which was, what would you do if you weren't scared? Moving from corporate to starting your own business is, is a big leap, and you're risking things. But what would you do if you weren't scared? When I answered that question, it was, actually, I think I'm going to start my own company and do this because it's about the journey. Mm-hmm. It's not about the destination.
Yeah. So when did you start Beyond Philosophy officially?
2002 is the official date. So 22 years ago.
That's amazing.
I'm a bit of a veteran now. It's interesting when you look at the stats and you find out how many, the average time for a business to fail. So the good news is I'm a bit of an outlier because it hasn't failed yet.
I think you are an outlier because you also were an early kind of adopter or influencer in the LinkedIn space. I feel like kind of even before LinkedIn, influencers were really a thing. And
Sure.
now you have this massive following all around this idea of customer experience. So can you talk a little bit how you developed that?
I've always been a great believer in the Oscar Wilde saying, which is there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. So a lot of people say to me, it's a bit like the podcast, to be honest with you. People say to me, can you prove the ROI of the podcast? And my answer is, nah, I can't prove it. But is it the right thing to do? Absolutely. Okay. Because you don't see those connections of people listening to you. And when you start thinking about it just from this podcast perspective, when I first started doing it, somebody wise once said to me, imagine if you could talk to your customers for half an hour or potential customers for half an hour each week, would you do that? And most organizations would give their right arm to do that. So building up that is key. So going back to your question, how did I get started on LinkedIn? I just started to put things out there thinking that now you mention it, it's an interesting point actually, because what I realized was that I was an expert in customer experience, but what I realized was that nobody knew that I was. So in that sort of revelation, it goes, well, I know a hell of a lot about this subject. The problem is that nobody knows that I know a hell of a lot about the subject. So therefore, and that's before, content marketing really came about, I need to put stuff out there. So I was putting stuff out there. And the funny story behind it was that LinkedIn were starting this influencer program. And they wrote to me saying they wanted me to be one of the first 150 influencers, along with Barack Obama and Richard Branson and everybody else. And I thought,
think about how crazy that is. That is amazing.
Well, yeah. And you know what? I thought, this is a spoof. This can't be real. And I thought, I'm not responding because somebody's, winding me up somewhere. But I decided to respond, and I'm glad I did. Because it was real. Mm-hmm. And clearly what they were doing was they were looking across the market, and they had some big names. I'm not putting myself up there with Obama and Richard Branson, but they were looking at their market, and clearly I was a larger voice in a market that has grown in importance over the last 20 years and has become a big issue for business. As I was putting content out there, and they obviously thought it was good and people were reading it, the rest is history, as they say.
At one point in business, customer experience was just kind of the heart of people. And then it became about growth. And society as a whole. And customer experience started to take a back seat. But as behemoths grew and the tech boom grew, then little small businesses could start nicking away at big, giant companies' market share, because we actually had an opportunity. We had platforms, we had ways to connect with customers. And so the small business being able to provide that personal customer experience maybe started to take away from some of that. And so customer experience and providing that kind of came back. Does that somewhat track?
Yes, it does. But the main driver has been around the driver of commoditization. Okay. So think about your cable company. What's the difference between one cable company and another cable company?
They all suck.
What they do, absolutely. Rattle on about that for 4 hours. If you think about vacations that you've had, true experiences that you've had, if you think about going to Disney, what are you buying? You're buying an experience, okay? And therefore, what's happening is that all products and services are becoming equal. So the time from innovation to imitation is now a matter of weeks. So if you're in the financial services industry, somebody comes up with a new product and they've copied it within weeks. You think of Amazon, every time you look at a product, they're bringing out their own brand and their own label and everything else. It's difficult to just compete at that level. So if you want to start to, and the trouble with commoditization obviously is it drives down the price, drives down profitability. So therefore, lots of organizations have recognized they're not doing a good job on providing a good experience. And the smaller companies can provide a good experience, okay? I think businesses get to a sort of a midpoint where they have a challenge of scaling up. But if you think about the large corporate companies, that's where the problems lie. Hence, lots of organizations now focusing on how do we improve our experience? Because we all know as well, just from, you phone up a call center and it says your call's important to us. And clearly it's not, because they keep you waiting for half an hour. And, late deliveries and everything else that happens, that most experiences that we have are not very good. I was in Publix yesterday, give you an example, at the checkout. And the guy there, all he said was, I've got to go. And he started to rattle through the things as fast as possible. The reason go to Publix is for the experience. I could go to Aldi or Walmart and get the stuff cheaper. But, that's not the type of experience that I would expect from Publix.
Some of these businesses and brands have built themselves up on this idea of having a good customer experience. And so when you go into Publix, they could actually kind of let you down when you don't have what you expect from them. But in the reverse, I feel like the standout experiences are that they stand out, right? Like the good stands out and the bad stands out. And I've actually, a couple of weeks ago, needed to return a pair of shoes. These Rothy shoes. I bought them on Black Friday, put them in my trunk, and after I realized they didn't fit, totally forgot to return them. So I was well outside of the return window. And I just messaged and asked, could I even return them for credit? I haven't worn them at all. I had just the most fantastic chat with a person and it made me think, wow, that was incredible. They let me return the shoes, but also he made jokes with me oh, it sounds like your shoes have been going on a joyride for 4 months. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what's happened. And so anyways, it turned in what I was nervous about and really not looking forward to is trying to fight with this company about returning this thing that I have not worn, turned into this fantastic experience.
And when you think about that, so if you were to ask the question, well, what is a customer experience? We would say that there are 4 aspects of it, okay? There is what we would call the rational part of the experience. So let's just take your experience there. So the rational part of the experience is, or the transactional part is, you've got a pair of shoes, you want to return them, okay? But actually, the experience that you've just outlined is what you talked about was not the what, but the how. You talked about the how you were experiencing. You realized that you should have returned those shoes before. Your expectation was that it was going to be a problem. The really good news was it wasn't. So that then comes down to the emotional side of an experience, okay, which is how you feel. So how does your customer feel? The third aspect is then what we would call the subconscious parts, okay? So the parts of an experience that you don't even think about. How quickly they answered the phone, okay? You don't think about that until it suddenly starts to become a problem. I once gave one of my team, I was training them on what customer experience was, and I said, and I gave them a brochure, and I said to them, look at this brochure of this company and tell me about this company. What do you think of it? When I gave it to her, I'm just looking for a piece of paper. What she did was she actually took the piece of paper and she rubbed it between her fingers, okay? She didn't realize she was doing that, but that's what she did, okay? Because she was associating the quality of the paper with the quality of the company, okay? And again, those are the things that are important. And the fourth aspect then is, and this is what our podcast is all about, it's obviously all about customer experience, but we have a professor on there, Professor Ryan Hamilton from Emory University, but it's also about the behavioral aspects, behavioral science, and looking at why do human beings do what they do, okay? Which is really why it's important. To be honest with you, Ellie, even with Resonate, okay, why do I come to Resonate to produce my show? Well, because you know what? If I'm an expert on customer experience, I need to provide a good customer experience to my listeners, okay? So the quality of the recording is really important to me, because that sends a subconscious message, like the paper example, that sends a subconscious message to my listener about the quality of what I say and what my company does. So the reason I've been with you guys for 5 years is because you do an outstanding job at producing the show. And that adds to it. And even just to prove a point, only the other day we had a client who basically said, because we do some sponsorship on the show, she said, I was looking for a podcast to invest in, and I was listening to the production quality of the shows. And he said, I've come to you because of that. Okay. The point I'm trying to make is a customer experience is not just about the transaction. It's about how the customer feels. It's about the subconscious messages that the organization give. And then it's about understanding the customers from a human perspective. Okay. Typically customers will say that price is the biggest reason for them making a decision. And invariably it's not. It's also about the experience that they get when they're dealing with that organization.
Yeah. And I think that that's a wonderful point. And I'm appreciative that you feel that way about Resonate. But I also know that you bring such quality content that it makes our job a lot easier, because when you create a podcast specifically and you're talking about customer experience, whether that podcast be on software or it is on filmmaking, when you bring value to a show, when the content is valuable, meaningful content, it makes it so much easier when the quality of the sound is good, and then we can take it and make it even better. We can create that wonderful customer experience for your listeners, for your audience. Since you started your business around providing value, and you started even putting stuff out on LinkedIn and then on podcast. Sure. It's all about providing value to those customers, those listeners, and it all kind of feeds itself back to you so that you end up with a new client for ads on your show.
No, absolutely. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. The other thing is we just enjoy doing the podcast. So Ryan and I wrote a book together called The Intuitive Customer about 7-8 years ago. And when we were just debating the topics to write in it, we were having a bit of a laugh and a joke. And we just said, wouldn't it be great if we just did a podcast? So one of the other reasons we do it is we just enjoy it. And to be honest with you, I think part of that comes across. And the feedback that we've had about the show has been that people like the banter between the two of us. And again, the only reason I'm saying all of that in this context of customer experience is people can tell when you are being genuine. You're picking up the signals that an individual is giving in there. You can tell whether they're being genuine. Yes, they like the information we're giving, but again, it's the way that we do it. And therefore, it goes to show it's not just, again, about the what. And this is a general rule for everybody listening. It's not just about the what that you're doing. It's about the how that you do it, and then understanding how customers make decisions.
Absolutely. I want to pump you for a little bit more of your expertise here on customer experience, and specifically about maybe moving a customer from just being a good customer to a loyal customer to a one that is like a raving fan that brings others. So can you tell us a little bit about the science of that, or I guess it's maybe a little bit of an art and a science, and helping develop customers into the kind that are
sure
huge fans?
It's an interesting word, loyalty, when you talk, and it's probably one of the most overused phrases in business, which is customer loyalty. Because normally what that means is that the customer gives us all their business. And again, it's a very transactional thing. If I was to say to you, here's a question for you. Who are the people in your life that you are most loyal to? So forget, it doesn't have to be business, but
my
in your life.
My husband and children.
So you have an emotional attachment to your husband and your kids. Mm-hmm. I'm sure if they're anything like mine, they can drive you around the bend sometimes. Yeah. They do things you don't like. Okay. But you still love them and you're still loyal to them. Okay. So loyalty is an emotional attachment. Yeah. If I was to say to you, hey, I've got a really good husband over here you could have, and I've got some really good kids, and they're a lot cheaper to run than your existing family. Would you fancy swapping? Okay. You probably wouldn't. But the point I'm trying to make is loyalty is an emotional attachment. It is not a logical thing. So how do you build up loyal customers? Well, you have to do things for them, and you have to go above and beyond the call of duty. In fact, we were on the podcast the other day, and one of the thoughts I had was, which I think is a really interesting thought, which is, what have you sacrificed for your customer? To have loyalty like you have with your family, we all have to compromise and sacrifice. So what have you sacrificed for your customer? If you go back to that emotional attachment, then a key question for me becomes, well, if we are to build an emotional attachment, which emotions are we trying to evoke in our customers? And these are the questions that I ask in our consultancy work with all of the large corporates. I have to say 90% of them don't know the answer to these questions. So which emotions are you trying to evoke in your customer? So is it trust? Is it cared for? So if you go back to your shoe example, they have built trust with you. They shouldn't have accepted that order back. And we all know that there are some organizations that even if you were trying to send it back within the timescales, they would have been a pain in the neck. Mm-hmm. Okay. They're the type of organizations that wouldn't build loyalty. But I'm sure because of the experience that you've had now, they're starting to engender that loyalty with you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So consequently, you need to ask yourself the question, you need to recognize that loyalty is an emotional attachment. You need to recognize that it's not just a transactional thing, okay? And you need to start investing in the customers that you want to keep. That's a key phrase, the customers you want to keep. That doesn't mean to say all customers, because there may be some customers you don't want to keep, yeah? And you need to start to think about, well, if you want to evoke trust or feeling cared for or making the customer feel valued, then how are you going to do that? How do you make a customer feel cared for? What is it that you need to physically do or say? And those things over a period of time will then build up a loyal customer. And what we know is things will go wrong in the business. They always do. Yeah. And if you've truly built up loyalty, then your customers will remain with you, even though things may have gone wrong a bit or you've had some glitches or something's happened. You won't just lose them straight away. So it's a very worthwhile investment.
Building trust takes a long game. I do want to reference something that you said earlier in the show, which was that most organizations would give their left arm to have 30 minutes of undivided attention from one of their customers, because you have the time to create trust or to create that emotional attachment when you spend real time. The reason why I have loyalty or emotional attachment to my husband and children, well, my children is different. The reason why I have it for my husband is we spend time together. It was in that courtship that we spent lots of time together, and we built that trust and we built that mutual respect and love for each other. And so getting as much time with your customer, I think, can help build that loyalty and trust that you're talking about.
I've listened to podcasts for years, and what I find is that I feel I know the presenter. I've clearly never met them, but with a number of podcasts, I feel that if I saw them in the street, I could walk up to them and have a conversation. And I feel a level of emotional attachment with some of the podcasts that I listen to. And that's clearly what you're trying to build with your customer. Because for me, the issue becomes, it's all a matter of being in the right place at the right time. And therefore, by putting information out, by doing the podcast, what you want is that after 2 years of listening to the podcast, then one of the listeners go, you know what, actually, we need to do some work on customer experience. You know what, I'm going to give Colin a call. Or I'm going to make a contact with him. And that's what happens. And when you do, the The amount of time I've had people say, oh, it's really funny talking to you because, I listen to you every week and you said this last week about Ryan and it really made me laugh. And you've built that relationship. And I think that's the great thing about a podcast is you can build that relationship.
I absolutely have a handful of people that I am emotionally attached to and have never met for no reason. I think of an influencer who I believe is very authentic, right? Which is not something you always feel about like that type of business model. But I think this person is super authentic. We have kids around the same age. I feel like we're best friends. She has no idea who I am. It has made me go on to purchase her protein powder and things that she has recommended. There have been several recommendations that I have come off of from her that I have now purchased. And it's because of that built up trust. Tell me a little bit when you talk about your LinkedIn, your newsletter, and your followers, you've kind of built a little bit of this like marketing engine that brings you loyal audience and customers around this. How does that functionally work for your business?
Basically, what happens is that I sit down and come up with an idea of what we're going to talk about. And we then record the podcast, send it over to you guys. That's then published. I think it's published on a Saturday. On the Monday, we then tell people through the social media that the podcast is available. On the Wednesday, we then do a newsletter, which is on LinkedIn. And therefore, there's, I think you said 84,000 subscribers. That is effectively an articulation of the podcast in written form. But we also have the link to the podcast at the top of the page. And it's actually surprising how many people will listen to it at the top of the page. And we only discovered that, interestingly enough, the other day when one of the team made a mistake and didn't post it in the right place. And we suddenly saw the downloads decline. And we went, oh, that's an interesting bit of learning. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
So we do podcast Saturday, Monday, tell people about the podcast, Wednesday, newsletter, then telling people about then do social media, telling other people that that's available. I guess the point I'm trying to make is it all germinates from the podcast. That's like the key vehicle, strategic vehicle. And then we have a whole campaign that runs from there onwards. And then we do some more personal stuff as the week goes on. We started doing a thing called, which is quite popular, rants and raves, which is just me having customer experiences where you go, this is stupid, ridiculous. And raves, which is, hey, this is a really good idea. Look, this was a really good company. Just to try to make it practical again.
Yeah, and that brings the fun. Absolutely. Well, if someone is either a new business owner or organization director of some sort, they know they want to improve the customer experience. Maybe it's lacking or struggling. Where would you tell them to begin? Like, what would be your hot 1, 2, 3, start here?
The first thing would be ask yourself this question. What is the experience that you're trying to deliver to your customers? Because again, most organizations do not have a clear articulation of what they are trying to do. Or what happens is that if you look across the business, everyone has their own opinion of what they should be doing. So marketing, I've got one view, customer service have got another view, sales have got a different view. And that's where you get that sort of jarring. So I would first of all take a strategic step back and say, what's the experience that we're trying to deliver? Underneath that is then, well, what emotions are we trying to evoke? And then start looking at the data as to, and this means that you need to be doing some form of survey or talking to customers and trying to find out where things are broken. But the other thing that I would really counsel for people to do is not just to listen to what their customers tell them, but to look at what they are doing. So I said to you that customer experience falls into these 4 areas, and we've talked about this sort of behavioral science piece. The really interesting thing is that oftentimes what people say and what people do can be very different. Mm-hmm. So my famous example is that Disney know that when they ask their customers what they want to eat at a theme park, people say they'd like to have an option of a salad. Disney also know that people don't eat salads at theme parks. They eat hot dogs and hamburgers. What your customers tell you is the number one issue may not necessarily be the number one issue.
We lie to ourselves about lots of things. Yeah.
Yeah. We either lie to ourselves because we find it socially unacceptable to say whatever it may be, or we lie to ourselves because we don't want to, we don't even realize that we're saying it. Understanding, reading, being able to read between the lines and see what people are doing is the key aspect here. And recognizing that we human beings, we like to think we're logical animals that make logical decisions, but we're not. Mm-hmm. We make irrational decisions. So those were the key bits of advice. Set the strategy, look at what your current experience is, and then sort of look at what customers are physically doing.
Absolutely. Well, Colin, thank you for your time and energy and talking to us about this. I think it is so important that business owners are really examining their customer experience. How can people find you if they wanted to work with you, or if they wanted to just listen to your podcast and follow your newsletter?
They can go on to our website, which is beyondphilosophy.com, or just go onto LinkedIn and look up Colin Shaw. The newsletter is called Why Customers Buy. And all the podcast you've talked about is the Intuitive Customer, and it's all over those places. So
thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks very much. And thanks for the great job that your team do, Ellie. It's really good. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If it resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Reviews are key to helping us grow and bring more useful insights to other people like you. If you have any questions about today's show, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at podcast@resonaterecordings.com. We may even feature your questions here on the show or answer them on social media. And as always, if you're looking to start or improve your podcast, reach out to Resonate Recordings. We want to see you take advantage of the strategic content engines that podcasts can create. We are here to help you. Just book a call directly on our website at resonaterecordings.com.